Welcome to the deep dive. If you're here, you want to grasp the big, complicated stuff quickly, thoroughly, but without getting swamped.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And today we're diving into something that might sound a bit technical, but trust me, it's crucial for understanding where things stand globally. Contested logistics in Europe.
It really is. We've been digging into this analysis by Major General David Sanford from the Logistics Officer Association. It's called Battling Sustainment, Contested Logistics and the War in Europe.
Right. And it really lays out why this concept, which maybe felt a bit historical, is suddenly front and center again, especially, with the war in Ukraine.
Definitely. So our mission today, for you listening, is basically to unpack this. What is contested logistics in Europe now? Why should the U.S. care? What are the risks? And what are people thinking in terms of solutions? All based on this material.
Okay, let's set the scene a bit. For decades after World War II, I think the general view, particularly for the US and NATO, was that moving stuff around Europe was, well, relatively safe. Predictable, even.
Totally. Post-Cold War, after the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union dissolved. There was this widespread feeling that Europe was a stable platform, a secure rear area almost.
You could stage operations, move troops, supplies.
No.
The assumption was largely uncontested movement, the article points out. The Warsaw Pact vanished in 91.
Yeah, and the Soviet Union itself soon after. That massive, direct, conventional threat that had shaped everything for 40 years, gone. It felt like a fundamental shift.
But as the article hammers home, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 just shattered that perception. Suddenly, Europe is potentially a contested logistics environment again.
It's a stark wake-up call. Those old assumptions about easy movement, they just don't apply anymore in the face of a determined adversary.
And the article actually gives us the official definition. It's from Title 10 of the U.S. Code. It defines a contested logistics environment as one where an adversary tries to disrupt logistics.
Across all domains, yeah. Land, sea, air, space, cyber. Targeting our ability to deploy, sustain forces, whether that's happening, at home, en route, or overseas.
And Ukraine is kind of the living example of this, isn't it? The sheer scale and speed of sustainment needed there, and the vulnerability of those supply lines.
Absolutely. It's put a spotlight on potential weaknesses when logistics itself becomes a battlefield.
Which brings us to this historical parallel that the article makes the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II. Why is that relevant now?
Well, the Battle of the Atlantic, running roughly from 39 to 43, was fundamentally about controlling the sea lanes between North America and Britain, vital for the Allies.
Right. They needed to blockade Germany, get supplies through, Project Power.
Exactly. But the cost was just enormous. Thousands of merchant ships, warships sunk, tens of thousands of lives lost.
A brutal fight.
Absolutely. And here's the kicker, the really critical point Major General Sanford makes. Today, the U.S. simply doesn't have the shipbuilding capacity it had back then. We couldn't absorb those kinds of losses.
Wow. So we can't just replace ships at that rate anymore.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Which makes understanding and mitigating these contested logistics risks now so much more vital. We don't have that buffer we had in WWII.
That's a really sobering thought. Okay, so the article then shifts gears a bit, talking about the U.S.-Europe economic ties. Why is that piece so important in this context?
It's huge. The U.S. and the EU are massive trading partners for each other, like the biggest. We're talking over $1.3 trillion in goods and services traded in 2023 alone.
$1.3 trillion.
Yeah, and that's about 19% of total U.S. foreign trade. Add in other key European partners like the U.K., Switzerland.
Yeah.
It pushes closer to $1.5 trillion. It's deeply intertwined.
So if logistics in Europe get messy, it's not just military supplies that get stuck.
Exactly. It hits our economy directly. Consumer goods, components for manufacturing, disruptions there could cause shortages here. And the article makes this interesting point. Prolonged shortages could actually, affect the American public's willingness to support a conflict.
That's a fascinating angle, the link between, stuff on shelves and national will. The article mentions Russia targeting Ukraine's agriculture and energy, maybe partly for that reason.
It definitely raises that question. It suggests logistics planners need to think broader than just military kit. Disrupting civilian life can be a strategic weapon itself, impacting resolve, impacting deterrence.
Right. And it's not just general trade, is it? There's specific defense stuff we get from Europe.
Oh, absolutely. That $1.5 trillion includes defense articles, critical components, stuff our own defense industrial base needs. The DoD relies on Europe for things like integrated circuits, certain medicines, refined petroleum, raw materials.
The article has figures showing supplier locations, right? Mentioning the UK specifically.
Yeah, it highlights the UK's role. And while the US exports more defense value overall, we are definitely reliant on imports for key components and materials. We're not self-sufficient.
And there's a figure, figure 5, that apparently shows the percentage of support for specific US weapon systems coming from the EU.
Exactly. It doesn't give specific numbers in the text we have, but imagine, say, a common missile system where maybe 25 or 30% of its vital parts come from EU countries.
Okay.
Those are systems we need for deterrence or conflict in Europe. So if that supply chain gets hit, our own readiness suffers directly.
That really drives home the interdependence. It's not just buying finished products, it's components deep inside our own systems.
Yeah.
And then there are the raw materials themselves.
Right. Figure 6 in the source points to critical minerals we import from Europe, things needed for artillery, body armor, targeting systems, medical gear, lithium batteries.
Mhm.
The list goes on.
Essential stuff.
Totally essential. And if those flows are disrupted, our ability to produce what we need could be severely hampered. The article contrasts this with WWII, citing Maya Clark,
Sure.
pointing out we had much more domestic raw material and manufacturing power back then, partly thanks to policies after the Depression.
So we're more vulnerable on the raw materials front now, too, given all this. What are the big lessons from Ukraine for logistics planners, according to the article?
Well, first, yeah, Russia messed up its logistics badly at the start. Poor planning, underestimating needs, vulnerable convoys. But the article warns, wisely I think, don't count on your enemy making those same mistakes again.
Right, don't bank on incompetence.
Exactly. The bigger lesson seems to be that a conflict with this serious adversary is likely going to be long, months, maybe years, and it will span all domains, not just land warfare.
Which changes the whole sustainment calculation, doesn't it? It's not just about having supplies ready to ship.
Precisely. Sustainment starts way earlier now. It starts with production. Do you have the raw materials, the processing capacity, the factories, the workforce? And crucially, these elements might be scattered across multiple countries.
Like we were just saying about components and minerals.
Yeah. And look at Russia now, going to North Korea and Iran for basic ammo. That shows their industrial limits when facing a contested environment, even when their suppliers aren't contested.
So this all points towards needing, as the article says, strategic logistics thinking and a whole-of-government view. What does that actually look like?
It means logisticians can't just focus on the tactical how to move it. They need to understand the strategic level, global production, international trade, economic impacts, and build that into their plans from the start.
A bigger picture approach.
Much bigger. Thinking about the entire chain, factory to foxhole. The article also suggests that the way logistics is currently somewhat decentralized across the different military services might make getting that total unified view difficult.
So breaking down silos, basically. Bringing in expertise from commerce, treasury, state debt, everyone.
That seems to be the implication. You need all those perspectives to tackle a problem this complex.
Okay, so are there potential solutions discussed? Any historical models?
Yeah, it mentions the Defense Plant Corporation, set up back in 1938 before WWII, specifically to expand U.S. industrial capacity for the coming war.
Ah, proactive expansion.
Right. And more recently, there's the CHPS and Science Act, aimed at boosting U.S. manufacturing and supply chains, though that's largely focused on competition with China.
So the article hints we might need something like that Defense Plant Corporation again, but maybe broader, including allies.
That's the suggestion. Build resilience together. Reduce the shared risks of depending on supply chains that could easily be disrupted in a conflict. It's about protecting military capability and the wider economy.
Okay, so wrapping this up. The big takeaway seems to be Ukraine has forced a serious rethink about logistics in Europe. We can't assume it's easy or safe anymore.
Not at all. And because the U.S. and European economies and defense industries are so tightly linked, this isn't just a military problem over there. It's an economic and security issue right here.
Getting supplies through isn't just about winning on the battlefield. It's about keeping our own economy stable and maintaining public support.
Exactly. It's a fundamental challenge.
Which leaves me with a final thought for everyone listening. Given how tangled up global supply chains are everywhere, not just U.S.-Europe, how might future conflicts mess with our ideas of national defense and economic security even more, in ways maybe we haven't even fully grasped yet?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it?
And maybe what role do we as citizens play in understanding these connections and maybe even adapting to a world where these flows are less certain?
Definitely food for thought. This deep dive really only scratches the surface. It's a huge ongoing issue.
Well, hopefully this gave you a clearer picture of contested logistics in Europe and why it matters. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Catch you next time.